Let's continue to discuss the myth number 3 here about comparative advantage. Okay, the third myth is actually built upon the second one, okay, which is also about Norway's here. It says that trade exploits a country, especially a developing one, and make it worse off if its workers receive much lower wages than the workers in other nations. Okay. Again, when you first heard about this, it sounds so reasonable. Okay, you may even under the impression that trade with these developing countries may not be moral, right? Because whatever we buy, like these necessities, this clothing, right? Um, equipments, like appliances, these are so cheap or affordable at the expense of lower wage or standard of living uh, for these folks in developing countries, right? Um, Later in class, I will bring a real world example about iPhones and its actual manufacturer, Foxconn. Okay, and there's a series of suicides took place at Foxconn's factories several years ago. Okay, and but here I would like to raise a question. What is an alternative for them? I mean, these folks in developing countries, okay? Uh, if they do not uh, get involved in international trade, specifically in this case, we're talking about exports, right? They produced, exported products. Do they have a better choice, or do they have choice at all without a trade? Okay. Here on the screen, you see this poll made by Pew Research Center, which is a very prestigious independent research institution. Okay, they poll among these advanced economies and emerging economies. Emerging economies means these developing economies uh, which grow relatively faster, okay, in the past years. Okay. Now, I would like to draw your attention to these emerging economies. Okay, so this poll question is: does trade with other countries lead to an increase in the wage of workers, a decrease in wage, or does it not make a difference? Okay. So you see here on the left-hand side, this blue bar shows, how many people said that, how many percent, I'm sorry, how many percent of the survey respondents said that trade decreases wage. On the right-hand side, how many percentage said that trade increases wage. And the number on the far right is the percentage of survey respondents saying that trade doesn't really make a difference in their country. Okay. Now, as you can see, Kenya, India, Tunisia, Nigeria, Indonesia, Philippines, South Africa, Brazil, Mexico. In every single country, we find more people, either much more or a little more, saying that trade actually increases the wage in their country. The median number is 47 versus 20, okay, for trade benefits their wage increase. Okay. What's interesting is actually, I mean, if as mentioned by this myth, trade actually lowers their wage, so why people hold that belief, especially in developing countries, right? What's interesting is, when you look at this top group of advanced economies, you actually find there's multiple countries where even the advanced developed countries, they find that trade actually hurt their wage growth. Okay, including Germany here, okay, Greece, Argentina, Japan, France, Italy. Okay, and the median number is much closer compared to that among the emerging economies. Here, among the advanced economies, it's 31 versus 27. Okay, so only 4 percentage points higher, okay, in the survey among the respondents, saying that trade actually increases the wage in their country. If you pay closer attention to the United States, which is in the middle here, it's 31-31. So we are perfectly divided, okay, in every possible way. In other words, half of us, or I should say, I'm sorry, nearly 1/3 of us said trade increases our wage domestically in the U.S., but the equal amount of respondents said no, trade decreases our wage. Okay, about 30% of the respondents said that it doesn't really make a difference. Okay, so here again, another question is what is the alternative for the U.S.? Okay, if you believe this myth is true and or true, then what the U.S. could do. Okay, stop trading with the developing countries. Would that make the U.S. better off? Would that make these developing countries better off? Would that make the workers in these countries better off? So let's discuss that, these interesting things in class. Okay. Here, I show you another chart made by the Pew Research Center based upon their poll numbers. Okay. And this is public views on the impact of trade on wages. We find the correlation between that and the GDP growth. Okay, now I would like to ask you this time, what's your takeaway from this figure? In other words, is it in favor of or against myth number 3, and why? Okay, I mean, how this chart in general inspires you about the relationship between trade and wage. Okay, let's talk about this later in class. All right, there's also a slightly different version of myth number 3, which says trade exploits a country which usually doesn't have any absolute advantage by forcing it to specialize in the production of the primary commodities. So primary commodities includes the agricultural and natural resources products, okay, like crude oil, natural gas, iron ore, coal, rice, wheat, corn, cotton, these things. Okay. However, it's pretty easy for us to come up with the counterexamples. Okay? If we don't look at the statistics, but just look at do some case studies. So the East Asian economies, again, they are kind of the role models, okay, in terms of successfully make their economies grow faster through international trade. Okay, so some of these economies, again, they started with the primary commodities. Okay, they trade a lot with the rest of the world about their, especially the agricultural products, okay, like South Korea and Japan, okay, and but later it looks like they successfully transfer their economy, okay, from the agricultural ones to the manufacturing ones, and even today to high-tech driven economies. Okay, for example, South Korea, right, Taiwan. They exported a lot of high-tech stuff, right? Like semiconductors these days, right? So how did they do that? Okay. Another example would be oil exporting countries, okay? Especially the Middle East ones. Okay? For example, this picture shows the skyline of Dubai. It's a financial center. Okay. As you can see, it's amazing, right? Once again, they started with the oil exporting thing, right? They export their what they got from their mother nature. However, the comparative advantage is not fixed. It's not a constant, right? There are many different ways we can change the comparative advantage of an economy, especially developing ones. Maybe at the beginning stage, when they get involved in trade, their comparative advantage is, you know, about these primary commodities. But once they made the profit by exporting these, they can do something, right? They can promote the transformation of their economic structures, okay, by shifting its exports away from the primary commodities, all right? And again, the same question I raised before: what is the alternative if they don't rely upon the primary commodities? What else they could rely upon? Okay, manufacturing products, high-tech stuff, even at the early age of their economic development. Is that reasonable, right? All right, so here I believe we can summarize, what we discussed in this chapter. Okay, simply speaking, it's a Ricardian model. Okay, Ricardian model, we discussed it here in chapter 3, right after our introduction part, is because it's so important. Okay, it is also because it's very simple. We only have one factor here. We're talking about productive factor in Ricardian model, that is labor. Okay, remember we said that in the numerical examples, we have the unit labor requirement, right? And we also tell you the how many units of labor each economy has. So one factor, labor, and two economies, right? A and B, or England and Portugal, right? Mexico and Canada, right? So we give you different examples. And Ricardian model, as we said, is extremely important because the conclusion it showed us is trade is good. Okay, if this conclusion has been changed, or our belief that trade is good has been shaken, then we have to rewrite the whole textbook of international economics, right? And unfortunately, this important conclusion was commonly misunderstood. Okay, some people focused upon a specific group of workers or a group of people, and they forget about the whole forest. Okay, they focus too much about a tree or a leaf, and forget about the whole forest. And but we would also like to point out at the end of this our discussion in this chapter is Ricardian model is not perfect. For example, the model predicts the complete specialization, right? When we said that country A has a comparative advantage in pencils, and country B has a comparative advantage in iPads, then A should just produces pencils and B just produces iPads. However, in reality, that's not what we saw, right? And in reality, for example, in the United States, we have the absolute advantage and comparative advantage in many things, right? But you do not see us just producing these. Okay? For example, clothing, right? In these days, we don't have a comparative advantage in clothing industry compared to other developing countries like Bangladesh, India, right? However, you still see some government factories here in the U.S. Okay, you still see some, and so why? What happened here? Why would we do not completely focused or specialize? Okay, now once again, I would like to leave these for you guys to think about, and we're going to discuss it later, okay, in class.